Welcome everybody to the Sonoma County Israeli Film Festival. We are so honored to have you here at our Filmmaker talk. My name is Irene Hodes. I am the director of the Sonoma County Israeli Film Festival, as well as the Jewish Film Festival and cultural events here in Sonoma County, California. We are joined today by Tammy Federman, who is the director of Black Flowers. Black Flowers, as you know, I believe that all of you have seen the film, is a film that we featured at the Rialto Cinema last week on May 3rd. And it's also streaming online for another week and has been online for about 2 weeks now. So thank you all for joining us. I want to introduce Tammy and just a few words about the film before we get started with your questions and my questions. Tammy is joining us from London today, where she lives. She studied theater at the Umanuyot Academy in Tel Aviv. She's a graduate of the Mountain View Academy of Theater Arts in London. And in 2018, she directed her first film called Selfish, which was about the life of her late sister, Shelly Federman. The film premiered at the Jewish Film Festival and at festivals all over the world. And Black Flowers is her second feature. We welcome Tammy today. Hello, Tammy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.
It is a real pleasure. I would like to start off with a question of my own and of course invite the community who has joined us today to type their comments in the chat. Just to let you know again that this is being recorded, but because you are muted, your faces will not be in the recording. And so we will begin. Tammy, I would love to know how this film started. You have a background, I think, mostly in acting, and it is your second film, but it's such a beautiful film, all about 5 Holocaust survivors and how art has become their lives and helped them deal with their past trauma. How did it start? How did you think of this?
Well, from a very young age, I really wanted to work with Holocaust survivors. I grew up, most of my life was in London, some of my life was in Israel. I'm British Israeli. And, during the Holocaust Memorial Day, you get so overwhelmed, even as a child, by this idea of this part of our Jewish identity, of humanity's history. And since a young age, I was just overwhelmed, and confused and curious about this period in history. And I always wanted to learn from Holocaust survivors and really understand how such darkness can actually take part in the world, how this thing happened, and also how people can overcome such an incredible darkness and trauma. And I was very moved from the book, Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. That's a book that ever since I was a child, it was in our library. And my parents had lots of books, and there was like a shelf with lots and lots of books. And I remember just the title, Man's Search for Meaning. It's just such a powerful title. And the older I got, the more courage I had to actually go and open the book and read it. And I think it really resonated with me, this idea, this question of how can people find meaning in life, especially during such difficult trauma. And when you meet Holocaust survivors, and I was very fortunate and honored to sit and talk with these people and get to know them, and for them to share their story with me, they have a certain life vitality. And, there's something about these people that makes them survivors. There's something about them that is incredibly inspiring. I mean, just to think that these people had overcome such darkness and they have every right to be, disengaged from life. But on the contrary, these are people who continued, who created families, and are also artists. I'm so inspired and so honored to have met with them and have been able to share their story with people. And that's really sort of what moved me so much, to listen to these people, to learn from them, to tell their story, and to really see how can people find meaning in life following such difficult trauma.
I'm very interested in the specifics of how this happened, because you've chosen 5 people out of, first of all, many, but their stories intertwine in such interesting ways. And the thing about a documentary we know is, how do you develop a story from something expository out in the world? How did you know these people in advance, and what did you know about their stories in order to link them together?
It's very interesting. First of all, I was very lucky to work with a researcher. I worked with two researchers. One is Tali Shamir-Würzberger, and the other is Kim Legziel. And they both helped me to find these people. I didn't have access, it's quite difficult. And unfortunately, it's quite difficult to find Holocaust survivors who can talk and want to tell their stories, and most of them are incredibly elderly. These are people who could still, are very fluent, they can speak, they want to tell their story. So it's not easy to find, unfortunately, Holocaust survivors, and especially not artists. So that was really the most difficult thing, to find these people. And in some ways, I learned, especially with documentary, that in a way, the path is wiser than the person who treads it. So in documentary, from my experience, it's not very set out. You can have an idea of something, but in reality, it's a lot of it is engaging in life and engaging in an experience and seeing what happens, very much like going on an adventure. So some of the people we interviewed, some of them, it was almost, I wouldn't say coincidence, but almost spontaneous. For example, one of them who does the embroidery, Esther, we met Tommy, and he said, there's a woman at the end of my street. She's a friend of ours. She does embroidery. You should go and film her. And I said, you know what? We were here. Let's go down the road. And it was very lucky. And we met her. And the last story that is shown in the film, which is Ruti, which is a very, very powerful story, that I almost didn't happen. So that was I already had 4 stories, and my editor, I think it was the cinematographer, actually, they said to me, there's too many people, you don't need any more. We should do more scenes with the same people. And I said to them, there's one person that has come up. Her name is Ruti, and she's an artist. She was actually introduced to me through a curator, an art curator, because initially I wanted to do an art exhibit. And she recommended I speak to her. And I said, you know what, let's give it a try. And her story came back. And her story is so powerful and it's so different, because the way she deals with trauma is very much through repression. And she had told me that if she hadn't done the interview that day, she would have never told anyone her story. She hadn't spoken about it until that year. Her children, didn't know her story. She'd never told anyone what had happened. And only following her interview, she decided that if she can tell the camera, then she can sit with her children. And when we screened it in Israel, her son came to me and he said, I'm so relieved. Finally, my mother told what had happened to her. And people came up to me and said, oh, we know Ruti. We had no idea she's a Holocaust survivor. She just never talk about it. And I'm so happy and grateful that she did tell the story, because you can imagine the burden of carrying this untold story for so many years. So in a way, it was an intention that I set out into the world, but also an adventure and a story that sort of came to be, and meetings with people that led to other meetings. And the best things, the most interesting things in a documentary sometimes are things that happen in the moment that are spontaneous. And I think that's something that I learned.
I am so touched about how you described this, because what a loss to the world if she hadn't come up with that story, and that you came up with her at the last minute. And she really did, for those of you who need your memory jogged, Ruti was the last person in the film who probably had the most colorful palette in these very large canvases that we saw her paint, who had the story about being in an orphanage for most of the war, and never saw the outside in Belgium, I think it was. And it's interesting to see how somehow opposite some of these stories are. The artist Tommy, who works in many different media that we saw earlier in the film, also didn't want to speak earlier in his life about being a survivor, but now wants to tell his story all the time, that it's his mission. And yet we see that there are people who still really don't want to talk about it. But for all of them, you see it in their art, whether they want to or not.
Yes, I agree with that completely.
I want to open the forum to some of our film festival committee that are here. And I'm going to, I think I see Ellen, and I'm going to ask to unmute you if you would like to speak. And I see Vel, and I'm gonna ask to unmute, but you don't have to. So I'm wondering if one of you would like to speak and ask a question, please go ahead right now. Ellen, I think you're unmuted already.
Okay. Well, you asked the most pertinent questions. Is your family at all survivors, that this was a particular interest of yours, Tammy?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think you're the first one who's asked me. I don't have Holocaust survivors in my own immediate family, and because my family is many generations in Israel, Zionists who sort of moved to Israel from both my mother and my father's side. But my husband's family are Croatian, and they have a story that when I met my husband, which was 20 years ago, actually. I was very interested in that. So in a way, from my own side of the family, no, but my children will have to sort of hopefully carry this memory. Anyone has to carry this memory, even if you're not Jewish. But I think it is into the family I married, into my children. I think they have in their genes probably that history, that loss. And I think my interest in it was not only because in my family I had Holocaust survivors, but because, as I said, from a young age, I couldn't grasp this darkness, this cruelty, you know, as a child. How do you accept that, or not accept, but come to terms with this is something that actually happened in history, and how can we keep this memory alive, keep these stories alive? I was always very moved by witnesses, the Holocaust survivors who gave witness when I was a child growing up. And when I was in high school, I went to visit Auschwitz and all of these places with my school. And there was at the time a grandfather of one of the children of the girls who came to speak. And I remember, now I think about it, he wasn't really that old at the time. I thought he was, you know, elderly. Of course, now he's probably much older. The way that he spoke, and it really left a strong impression on me. When we came to Auschwitz, he was very strong man, and when we came to Auschwitz for the first time, he started to cry, and he said, there was a memorial room service, and he said, this is the last time I saw my mother, and I never came back to separate from her. And he started to talk to his own mother, and I thought it was just something very difficult and powerful to experience as a teenager, I guess. And then probably that had an effect on me.
Thank you.
As I said before, we have members of our film committee here. So if any of you would like to ask a question, I will unmute you. I see Andrea and Jeff online. Just as a reminder, we are a community festival, and we wouldn't be able to do this without our film committee. So I see that Andrea is here. I'm going to ask her to unmute, and I'm going to mute Ellen. So Andrea, please feel free to ask your question to Tammy right now.
Hi there. I apologize. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. I apologize for coming in late, so I don't know if any of these questions have been asked already, but I guess I was curious about a couple of things. Did you have, I'm sorry, you know what? I have construction people here, so can you pass me for a moment?
Yes, that's okay. I will mute you now. Okay. I wanted to maybe touch upon the artistry of the film. This is, I don't want to say only your second film, but I can see you have a very creative background. I'm touched by the editing. So much of this film is about how we see their art and how it's shot and how it's put together. I know that so much of films come out afterwards in the editing process. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because it's very powerful how we see it and how we experience it through the camera.
It's interesting you should say that. I feel very much that it's a collaborative process. And I was very, very lucky to work with a cinematographer who's gifted, who's called theyexperienced. He's really, really talented. You can see the way that he shot everything with Ruti's paintings, the way he moves on the paper. And he's had a huge input in this film, and I'm just very grateful that I've been fortunate to work with him and learn so much from him. And also my editor, he's really taught me so much. His name is Yaniv Segalovich. He's just a wonderful human being and very experienced. And I really feel that in cinema, it's very much a collaborative process, because, you know, the way something is shot, the angle, the contribution of every person, it's really, really a collaboration. And with the editing also, you know, initially I wanted to do an art exhibit. That was my idea. And it became very, very difficult. And I even worked with a curator who was very, very nice and interesting. And I did some shooting of her interviewing people, but somehow it really didn't work very well. And in terms of the language, the cinematic language, it just didn't look, it looks like it just didn't feel right. And in the end, what worked much better is that each one of them just spoke and told their testimony, but we tried to do it in a way that still visually was interesting and was a little bit different, and put a lot of emphasis on their creativity. And it was very important that when they were talking about something that was quite difficult, to sort of break that or contrast that with showing art. So you can see even with Jenny, whose story is incredibly difficult, we try to put this beautiful, colorful stories. And whenever she's talking about a story that's very difficult, I try to balance it out in a way visually with her beautiful colors and aesthetic. Also, with post-production, you know, I worked with someone who did the colorist, who was really important for me, that the colors, you can see it very much in this movie cinema. The colors are golden and their skin is sort of warm, and we could have gone for like a blue sort of a bluish tone. And I looked at both and I said, let's go for the sort of this glowy, warm, golden sensation. So there's always a contrast between these dark stories and at the same time the beautiful aesthetic and the visual and the feeling of life and beauty. And so this contradiction between you're hearing these very difficult stories, but you're seeing these people and their art is very colorful. And there's always this tension between the darkness and the light, the trauma and the healing, and perhaps. So these are things that I think I was thinking of.
It's fascinating that you mentioned this, and I believe that we finally have a question from the community. But I did want to eventually touch on the concept of the therapeutic aspect of their journey, and whether you have a background in this as well. But let me just read off a comment here. The film's music creates a shared space for the artist and helps move the narrative between discussions of art and the discussions of the Shoah. Yet at certain moments, the music stops. How did you decide on the music and when you'd have silence?
It's very it's a very interesting question. It's a lot to do with that specific moment. A lot of working with the editor. The editor had a lot of input with that. With the entrances, it's very difficult to try and find that, but I was trying to find a balance between the stories. So when you move from one story to the other, for example, when you move to Tommy's story, all of a sudden it becomes the music is a little bit lighter, and you see him gardening and all this beautiful greenery, and then the music tries to be a little bit lighter. So you're always trying to balance out, you know, the more dramatic, heavier parts of the movie, which there are a lot of these moments, with a little bit of lighter moments. With the music becoming a little bit more uplifting. For example, with Jenny, at the end of her story, I was sort of intent on having that moment where she's dancing, because I wanted to show that she's still, you know, what's interesting about her, she has this very difficult past, but when I was with her, she went partying. She went to a dance party and there were people there and she was dancing, and she's sort of this combination. And when you meet her, she's wearing these colorful pink top, and it's really interesting to see someone like that who could have very easily given up on life, but is going to a dance party, going to the hair salon to get her hair done. So the music, I try to balance it out. So you have these dramatic moments, but then you have also lighter moments with a little bit of music that's more a bit upbeat, and it's very much about rhythm and the feeling, I guess, and working with an editor.
I see that Andrea is back, so I'm going to unmute her now.
Good
Go ahead.
morning. It's been a challenging morning here. Again, I didn't hear the beginning, so if these questions have already been answered, one of them was, how did you originally pick this topic? But then I heard the original share. I was just curious, when you did choose these particular artists, was it, I guess I'm wondering if there was a large amount of, how do you even go about that? And was there a large amount of people to choose from? Or, we're in a Holocaust, the Holocaust survivors are now, in their 90s?
Yes.
So I just wondered, how was that a difficult part of your process, I guess?
Yes, it was actually very difficult to find people. We found there was one woman who, it was quite sad. We saw a movie about her, and then when we met her, she had already, she was very, very changed. She didn't really want to talk very much, and she couldn't really interview her. That was difficult. There was one man that I still feel very regretful about it, because I really liked his character. He was this wonderful man. I really wanted to tell his story. He was, first of all, in the interview, he was wearing, I don't know how you call it, shlekes, we call it in Hebrew.
Suspenders. Suspenders.
Very sweet man. And what he would do, he would carve out Pinocchios. So his whole house was full of Pinocchios. And his story really touched me, because he had this very difficult story, but he spoke about himself and said that one of the things he likes to do, he does puppets. And he said that when he sculpts, that's the time that he's not remembering. It's very similar to what others said. When I'm sculpting, I'm not thinking about the past. I'm in the moment. It's very therapeutic. And this beautiful man who had quite little, and he was quite lonely, he said that he likes to go to help children in need. So one of the things that he did, he worked with an opera singer, and they would do puppetry in a children's hospital in Israel for children who are cancer patients. And I thought to myself, that is such a beautiful act of grace. This man who goes with an opera singer and he plays these puppets for little children. And he was just this lovely, lovely man. And I tried to call him afterwards a few times. He wasn't feeling well, and he just didn't want to participate after that interview. And it was it's a bit sad, because you really don't want to miss out on a story like that. But it's very important when you're making a documentary that people are willing to take part in it. And I cannot, if someone decides that they're not willing to take on that part or to share their story, then I can't really force it. But his story stays with me. So that's important to me. But unfortunately, answering your question, there weren't a lot of people to interview. It was very hard to find, especially because I was looking for artists who are Holocaust survivors. It's not just Holocaust survivors to tell their story. That would have made it perhaps a broader ability to choose. It was artists. So it was very, very limited amount of people that I managed to find.
It sounds like the ones that you found made quite an impression on you.
They definitely did. I think that's the really interesting thing, to really, my mother would always take photographs of us. She was sort of a photographer in the house, and always photographing and documenting. And I think it really helped me understand that people are very, very interesting. If you really were always intrigued by the imagination. But my mother would always say to us, reality is stranger than fiction. This is how you say the sentence. So if you really learn from people and you really look deeply into other people and find interest in them, people are fascinating. And to meet someone for me like Saadia, he's such a magical person. He's magic to me. To know that a person like that exists in the world. He's 94 and he's more energetic and full of life and charismatic and creative and than I was in my 20s. So I'm very inspired by these people. I'm very, very inspired by them, and I'm really grateful that I managed to meet them and to be of service to them in any way of telling their story and sharing their beautiful, important stories.
And I find that it's even inspiring in a non sort of Holocaust context that these people have almost had second and third careers. that they don't stop. You know, a lot of people have this concept of retirement, and a couple of them have said, you know, I have retired and this is what I do now. That Sadia at the end says, since he's retired, he's had global exhibitions and all of that, that life is something that continues until it doesn't.
Yes, I think it's very much a choice. You choose life. And I think these people have made a decision to choose life, to give meaning to life. And that's really going back to that idea of Viktor Frankl, of man's search for meaning. It is a decision to choose life. You know, when we spoke to Saadia, you know, you can't put everything in the film. There's so much and you have to edit things out. One of the interesting things he said is that for him to survive, he would sing to himself. That's one of the things he would do, even in the Holocaust. He said people, he was asked a lot of questions, and one of the most interesting questions that someone asked him was, were you miserable in the Holocaust? And he said, if I was miserable, then I couldn't have survived. I needed to find a way to keep my spirit alive. And he said, I knew that I would survive. It didn't make any sense. There wasn't any logic in it, but I believed deeply that I would survive. And one of the things he would do, he would sing to himself, even when he was in the camps, even when he was working. And I think that to be in such difficult circumstances and to find within your soul that ability to sing to yourself, that is such a powerful statement about the human spirit, you know, about survival, about the soul, you know. So yes, I'm definitely inspired by these people, but I've learned so much from them.
Are there other parts of the interviews that you could not include that you wish you could? I know that you had a lot of editing. Does anything come to mind that touched your heart that you couldn't put in?
There was one story that really stayed with me, that I really fought with my editor. I was like, I want to get this story across because it's a symbolic thing. And he said to me, it just didn't, we tried it a few times, it didn't work with the editing. You know, Ruti, one of the interesting things, you have Saadia, who is obsessively documenting. He, more similar to me probably, I'm very much documenting things all the time. He wrote a 500-page book about his life. He has all the pictures, everything. Ruti is the opposite. She doesn't have pictures of her mother. Whatever she had, doesn't want to remember it. And one of the incredible stories about the way Ruti lives her life is that she was also a photographer for a certain period of her life. So she actually had a part in her life as a career as a photographer before she started to paint. And she became a successful photographer. She had exhibits. And she told me she had 5,000 photographs. And in one day, she decided to erase all of her photographs, all of her work, and that was it. She left it behind her. And in a way, I couldn't believe that's such a powerful testament, but it reminded me very much of this Buddhist idea that there's this idea of monks. I've seen it once actually, that they sit and they work with chalk. And they sit for hours and they create the wheel of light, samsara. And they sit for days and days and days creating this beautiful work of art. And the most powerful thing in it is that at the end, when they finish this work of art, they take their hand and they just move the chalk and the sand, this colorful sand, and the work of art is finished. It's forgotten. And that idea of what they say in Buddhism, non-attachment, something, even your greatest work of art, it exists for a moment. It's an expression, like life, like we are, you know, passengers, we're passing by. So even our expression, it's there for a moment, and then we have non-attachment. We're not attached to the result, you know. I thought that is such a powerful way to live life, very different from my grasping of things, you know. And that was something that I wasn't able to, again, to put in the film, but I share it, I keep it for myself, you know, and it touched me.
That's really beautiful. How interesting. We have a question from the community here from Debbie. I'm interested in the title. I never think of flowers as being black. How did you choose that image for the title?
That came up sort of, the flowers kept coming up in the embroidery, in Saadia's sculpture. But what really resonated, and I think is the reason probably for the title, and this is also something that I spoke with my researcher, with the Tali, it's the idea of the black flower, that she tells the story that she's very much repressing her past. She doesn't want to talk about it. She doesn't want to think about it. She doesn't remember her past. But then she goes and she says, you know what, I'll paint something light. I don't know if you remember this. She tells, I decided I'll paint flowers. Flowers are happy. but then, and she started making the flowers, but they weren't so happy. They were black flowers. And this idea that you cannot really escape your subconscious, you cannot really, you can try to leave it behind, but this is what perhaps Jung would say, the collective subconscious. It stays even in generations after this history, this story, it remains in your subconscious, and it comes up in the art. So the idea of, wanting to repress a story or a memory, but the memory comes up, and also this tension between darkness and light, the polarity. So there's a flower and it's beautiful and it's art, but it's also dark. So it's black flowers. There's always this polarity between life and art and something flourishing, but black flowers, So I think that was really the image that maybe brought about the title for the film.
Yeah, having seen the film a few times myself, you see the image of the flower come back, and I thought it was interesting that we saw the sculpture of a dark colored flower from Saadia, and there was a really nice symmetry. I thought it was bookended very nicely, with Ruti saying, "They're coming black. I don't know why. I wanted to paint flowers and they come up black." That flowers are this image of life and color, and they so want to create something beautiful, and maybe even a black flower is beautiful, but something else comes through it, and flowers die as well. So it's a really apt title, I have to say, really beautiful. I know I wanted to recognize that we have some more members of the film committee here. So if any of you know who you are, would like to ask a question out loud, I will unmute you. But otherwise, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. We have somebody who is absolutely quoting you here, and I think it's beautiful that the subconscious stays. It's wonderful. And I suppose we could go back to I'm not sure that you answered this question, but I also wanted to ask about the therapeutic aspect of this. Did you consult with any therapists or any sort of art historians about the process of healing through art in a more formal way?
I haven't, to be honest with you. Another person asked me about this. I didn't really, because I was working with with a cinematographer who is very experienced with working with people. He really helped me and knew how to sort of help people talk about their work through art and how to engage in it. But I took a little bit from my own knowledge of beautiful some courses about art therapy. That's something that I'm very interested in, but I didn't, in that sense, I didn't really work with someone specifically for that. It's more my interest, I guess, in this idea, and for my own my own interest in this idea of art and how it can really heal and how it can tell a story. But no, I didn't work with anyone like an art therapist or anything like that.
Did any of the artists themselves express that in a more straightforward way? Did some of them acknowledge that art, well, I suppose that Tommy said it very clearly, that art heals them. But it's as if the act of creation something heals the act of destruction that they experience.
I think they talk about it. I think Jenny says, I've worked it out, and I can look. What Jenny does is very descriptive. So she tells the story of the trauma that happened to her, and I was standing here, and this is us as children, and this is the baby in the crib. And she says, I worked it out, and now it's on the paper. So I still feel the pain, but it's like I externalized it, so I carry it less within me. I think that's a way of therapy. And also, I heard Ruti explaining it beautifully. That she said she was a very optimistic person, but she does feel anger. She does carry anger, and she would be very, very silent, and she would come to the paper, and she never knows what she's going to paint. But every painting that she had, she did it in one day. This I didn't know. I recently discovered this. So every painting that you see that Ruti did, it's a painting that she did in a day. It's not a lot. And she says, I would come with all this anger, and I would take everything out on the paint. And then she said, I was exhausted after I finished the painting. So I think there is a catharsis of the things that she represses and this anger, and the fact that her, they're all very different. Saadia says he works with shapes, and he thinks a lot before he comes to sculpt something, and it takes him a long time, and he's thinking about the sculpture, and it's very different. They're very different approaches. And with her, it's just this anger, this eruption, and it happens in a day. She finishes this painting and she's very exhausted after it. And the way she describes it, you can see that it's really a cathartic for her. You know, it's an expression of so much of a subconscious, something that is within her.
You might be interested in knowing that, we have Ellen who wants a question, but I did want to acknowledge that we thought it was such an interesting process that on Sunday we're doing a talk with an art therapist and a music therapist with your film as a jumping off point. So we're talking to some professionals, and one of them, Jamie, is on the call right now. So we are actually using this as inspiration to talk about trauma. As I don't know if you know this, but we live in an area that is affected almost every year by wildfires. And probably everybody on this call has evacuated and has experienced firsthand what it is to run away from a fire and, have our homes in danger, or might have even lost their homes in a fire. So this is something that we deal with, and it's a very different kind of trauma, but it's a traumatic sort of experience that many people in the world might not have on a daily basis. So we're very excited to use your film as sort of a jumping off point and a source of inspiration to talk about art and its healing capabilities.
What an honor. I'm so honored and grateful. Thank you so much. I really believe that, for me, art has been such an important part of my life in different mediums. And I really feel that the Homo sapiens, ever since from when we were in caves, we were the ones who were painting our stories in caves. So that need in us to create, to tell a story, I think that's very, very ancient. That's deeply rooted in us. So I think it's important, and I'm very happy that.
We're very excited to keep talking about your film. I'm going to unmute Ellen right now, or ask her to unmute herself. There she is.
I have a question about a specific scene, and that is the man who is a sculptor. You have a scene that actually is quite extended, and it struck me with eating soup with his wife. Yes. And how he made such an issue of her spilling her soup, and she just was looking at him, and it was like, that's your issue, not mine, kind of thing. So I wonder, why was that kept in? What did you think, or your editor? Why was that a significant scene?
Yeah, I really wanted that scene to be in, although it doesn't. It's a bit different from the language of the film. So not everyone. I wish I would have had more footage, because, for example, Tommy has this incredible wife, and I would have loved to have a scene of Tommy's life as well, but I didn't. I was very limited with the amount of it. It happened through COVID, so at some point these people were very isolated. I couldn't get any more footage. I had to work with what I had, and. This scene was important for me because it showed another aspect, and I love the relationship between them. What you don't know, first, it's also and it lightens up a little bit for the audience. It gives them a second to breathe, and to see something that's outside of these stories. What people don't know, and in a way, I was hoping to explore that further, but because each one of them is a very short segment, and it's quite sad actually. His wife is an incredible woman. They have this beautiful connection, and she's actually doesn't see very well. So the reason that he's explaining to her actually how to, usually the audience, when they see that, they kind of laugh, and it's a moment that's very sweet between them, but there's also a hidden story there that it's hard to know, because that she's actually sort of doesn't see very well, and he's actually helping her, teaching her how to and he says, because my wife, I need to go and help my wife, so that's why I have to stop sculpting. And he goes and he helps her. I just thought it's a beautiful scene, and it just felt intuitively like something that I wanted to keep.
Thank you.
We are getting closer to the end. We do have to end the talk at the top of the hour at the latest. So if the audience does have any further questions, please feel free to type them now, even if they're small, if you have a curiosity about them. I wanted to ask, maybe take it out into a different dimension about you yourself, Tammy. That you started off as an actress. I know you said that you work in many different media. Can you talk a little bit about why you work in filmmaking right now and if you intend to continue?
Yes, of course. I started off as a singer-songwriter. I was doing that for many years. I used to write music from a very young age. I learned performing arts. And when I was writing music and performing, I used to collaborate with different people. I used to tour with musicians. I really loved it, but I was, writing a lot of the music that I did. I was writing the music and I was writing the words and I was playing my guitar. And I think what I was trying really to do is create something broader. And with cinematography, with filmmaking, it's actually taking it to another level, that it's not just the music, it's actually also the visual. And in my own really process, what had happened to me is that the first documentary I made,
I made you a spotlight. It's okay.
The first documentary I made was actually about the life of my sister. I had a sister who was an artist, and she passed away. And she left an enormous amount of footage. She was an incredible human being and a wonderful artist. She was a social, political activist and artist. And she had all this footage that she left. And I just had to make a film out of this, of her life, because she was, her work was exhibited in the Tel Aviv Museum of Art. She was doing beautiful works and art installations and just beautiful things. And I had to tell her story. I had to make a movie about her life. And I made it, and it was a way for me to process the grief and to communicate. It was something that I couldn't control. It had to be done. And with my sister, I think it connects this idea. She was, she was quite ill, and through her illness, she kept making art. And the first documentary goes about from her art to her life, from her art to her life. So no matter how ill she was, she kept making art. And I think that idea of connection between trauma, illness, and art at the same time is something that really resonated with me and stayed with me. The importance of art in my life, the importance of truth and art and expression. And so when I came to this film, I think maybe that led me to that topic, in that sense of wanting to work with Holocaust survivors through the medium of art, which is sort of an extension of my first film. So that's what led me to make my first film and now my second. And hopefully I would love to make many more films and continue learning and exploring these ideas and learning more and more.
It's very interesting how you used the expression of film to heal your own pain, and then made a film about art healing other people as well. A common theme. Well, I want to offer one last chance for people to say something if they do have a comment that they'd like to ask, but I see that we've covered a lot of ground, and I want to make sure that I thank you again for making this beautiful film, and what an honor it was for us to be able to present it to our community.
Thank you. I'm so honored that, it's always such a miracle when something happens, because with art, 1 minute it's an idea in your head and you don't know how you're going to bring it into reality, and all of a sudden it's there. It has a life of its own, and it's reaching people and hopefully touching them. It's an incredible experience to actually bring something from the subconscious into reality. It's like like bringing life to the world, the creative, So I'm just so honored if it moves people, or people see it, or it touches them, or it's just a great honor for me. So thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. And I want to mention that I think it has a place in the Holocaust narrative, because I hate putting it this way, but I keep saying it to people, is that it's the happiest Holocaust film I've ever seen.
Wow.
It is so important to keep telling these stories, but it's often quite painful to see documentaries about this. But when you add the element of art, that by telling a story, you are simultaneously healing both the person and the audience watching it, that you're making a traumatic experience not traumatic to see and experience through your film. So in a sense, it's created a solution to making it a beautiful experience to watch it and not something that is inherently painful.
I think it's very, very relieved that you say that, because I think when I started it, this was really what I was hoping. I thought if people can watch Holocaust survivors who've been through the most darkest, unbearable things and see them as people who are inspiring, contributing to society, full of life, that is that says something about, about life, about trauma, about no matter what you go through, you don't, you can always choose life, you can always contribute to society, you can always find meaning, and it's our choice to sort of find a way back to life. So I think that says something that I've been very curious about. How do people come back from that, or how do they find meaning, but also to give people hope in a way. So the fact that it's hopeful and it ends on a positive, hopeful note of these people, what they're doing today, that the fact that they have families, the fact that they're contributing to society, that they're taking part in life, it was very important for me to finish the film on a positive, on a hopeful note. So I'm happy you felt that and it resonated with you.
And I think we're going to make this our last question here. But I think we're going back, but this is actually quite an interesting question. When speaking with people about their difficult experience, what was your process for allowing them to share? And I think that I'll expand on that and just sort of ask, what is your interview process? When you set a camera in front of these people, do you ask certain types of questions? How do you get into them telling their story?
Some of it I have written down questions, or even when I work with a cinematographer, we discuss and we think together what we're going to do. But a lot of it is it's a little bit like therapy, really. So really looking at the person, the camera, when you talk to the camera and you tell your story, it's very therapeutic. I think this is a form of therapy for people when they talk to the camera. But it's really also listening to their story and things that are coming up and being spontaneous in the moment, very similar to if you would do a therapy session with someone. And what I tried constantly to do is always go back to the art. So if a story was difficult to say, maybe try and tell it through the art. Always try to engage through the art. So it gives it another medium, but it also, things that are difficult to express. For example, Ruti, there were things that came up through the art that she didn't want to see, she didn't want to talk about. When they came through the art, for example, she says, in my painting, there's a woman. In my life, I don't have a mother, I only have boys, there's no sister, there's no mother, there's no grandmother, but in the paintings, you see the woman. And that comes up through the painting. So and she was showing her paintings, and that's how it came. So that was also something I was trying to move towards, that they go through the painting to the story. And it gives it sort of it gives them an action. So it makes it a little bit more, I tried a lot to film them doing their craft. So you have something that's visually interesting, but gives it also depth. But also that it goes from the art to the story, and it allows things that are sort of repressed to sort of come up.
That's a beautiful, intuitive sort of way to go about it. It seemed like it was an organic and lovely experience for them to film it. Yes. So Tammy, thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to remind the community that there is about another 6 days left to watch Tammy's film. If you'd like to see it again online on the Sonoma County Israeli Film Festival Eventive site, which you can find on the JCC homepage, which is jccsoco.org. And also it has been such a pleasure being back in the theater after 2 years not being there, and seeing, of course, this beautiful film with such lovely big colors on this huge screen was such a pleasure. So thank you for being a supporter of the Jewish Community Center of Sonoma County, of the Israeli Film Festival 2022. And continue to watch our films, and thank you, Tammy, for joining us. We really look forward to hearing about future projects, so do stay in touch with us if you can.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day and rest of your week. Bye.